Well, I want to thank you very much for joining me on this video. I'm wanting to talk today about the Residential Tenancies Act and circumstances where you can and should avoid coming under the Residential Tenancies Act. The Residential Tenancies Act, as you know, is a piece of consumer protection legislation, and as such is extremely unbalanced, unfair, in favor of the tenant. If you're a tenant, it gives you all kinds of protection. If you're a landlord, not so. There's specifically two areas, though, that I want to draw your attention to under the Residential Tenancies Act that can cause us some problems that we're not aware of. The first is raising rent. It's under rent control. Now, there was a time when, regardless of whether a tenant moved out and a new tenant moved in or the same tenant was there, we were stuck with a fixed rent, and it could only be increased by minimal amount once a year. Well, we're still under that if the tenant doesn't move out. So if you've got a tenant who stays there year after year, who's already enjoying below market rent, probably not going anywhere, you're limited to how much you can raise the rent every year to what is set by the government, and it's generally below the cost of living significantly. So that's one of the problems. The other problem is if you need to remove a tenant, it's very difficult. Now, you can remove them for cause, they're not paying the rent, or they're causing damage, or they're interfering with the quality of life of other tenants in the building. But it's a process, and it takes time, and it's costly. It's something that you want to avoid. Other times, for example, you want to extensively renovate the property, or you want to put it up for sale, and it's easier to sell if it's not occupied. You can't evict the tenant under those grounds. You're stuck. It's just very, very difficult. There was a time when I had a kiosk in the Mapleview Mall in Burlington. And we used it, the salespeople used it to showcase listings and so on. And we had a custom-built kiosk in a very specific location within the mall. When our lease came up for renewal, the plaza refused to renew our lease. I said, well, why? We've been really good tenants. They said, absolutely you have. But we have an opportunity to put somebody in there that'll not only pay rent, but we can charge percentage rent too. And so I'm sorry, you're going to have to move. Well, I had spent $10,000 buying this very custom-made kiosk. It was absolutely useless because it fit that one specific spot. But I was under the Commercial Tenancies Act, and that's the way it is. Residential Tenancy Act, not so much so. There are times when you may want to specifically purchase a property. Let's say you're buying a property from an elderly couple, and they have been living in the house, but they're hoping to move into an extended care home or some kind of senior accommodation. They got their name in, they're not sure when it's going to happen. So you come along and you sell it to an investor, and it's very good for the investor because he's got somebody who's got a track record of living in the house, is going to look after the house, going to take care of the house, and so he's not going to have to worry about who he's renting it out to. From the former owner's point of view, it's very good because they no longer have to face capital expenditures, which can be very costly if they're on a fixed income. They can live in the house that they've lived in for years and they love, but when an opportunity comes up to move, they don't have to worry, regardless of the economic climate, of selling their house. They just give their notice and move out. So that's great. But there may be another time when you buy a home and make it available to the owner as tenant, but you don't necessarily want to create a long-term tenancy. I had a salesperson contact me this week. They're buying a property, and they've allowed the tenant, the owner, to stay on as tenant at a reduced rent for a period of time because it suits the tenant. Tenant's going to move off, let's say live with their son in Vancouver, whatever their plans are. It works well for the tenant. It allowed the guy who's buying the property to get in and do some work in the basement while the owner lived there. So it seemed to be a win-win. The problem is, let's suppose the plans that the owner had to move in with the son falls apart. And the former owner, who's now tenanted in the property, says to the buyer, listen, I've decided I'm not going to move after all. I'm just going to stay on as a tenant. Well, you've got a problem. They are a tenant, so if you've given them reduced rent, hey, that's your reduced rent. Live up to 2.5% or 1.5% or whatever the government gives you year after year, and you can't evict them because you want to renovate. You can't evict them for a number of reasons. You've got a tenant. And so be very, very careful if you're structuring a deal like this. You can do something about it, but you've got to plan ahead and plan to do something about it. You need to insert in the agreement of purchase and sale. It's agreed and understood between the buyer and seller that the seller would be allowed to stay in the property as occupant, as described in the agreement of purchase and sale. However, the seller will not become a tenant under the provisions of the Residential Tenancies Act. And when you state that, that means they're not under that provision under the Act. It's only to expedite the sale, and after the month, 2 months, 3 months, or whatever, they're out. Hope that makes sense. Be forewarned, be forearmed. Thank you very much for investing your time. Talk to you again next week.